Hey everyone, Sassy Mouse here, and today, in honor of Pride Month, we're going to be talking about some terms and different terminology that is used in the LGBTQIA plus community. So, let's start with acronyms. The one that is probably most familiar to most people is LGBTQ, or LGBT. LGBT or LGBTQ stands for lesbian, bisexual, gay, trans, and questioning. A longer and more inclusive version is LGBTQIA+. This is the typical LGBTQ, lesbian, bisexual, gay, trans questioning, but also includes intersex and asexuals. Sometimes the Q is instead for queer, sometimes the A is for allies, but there's a plus at the end because as we become more and more aware and more accepting, these communities and the different things that this term covers have expanded. The next one is GRSM. GRSM is short and easy, and it's inclusive of everyone. GRSM stands for gender, romantic, and sexual minorities. This includes everyone from different sexualities to different genders to different romantic preferences. The next term we're going to do is biological sex, sometimes just referred to as a person's sex or as their sex assigned at birth. A person's biological sex is the sexual characteristics that are based on their biology, based on their chromosomes. For the majority of people, their biological sex will be XY or XX, but we'll get into more specifics of that soon. The next term is gender presentation. Gender presentation is the outward appearance you give that is an expression of the gender you identify with. Remember that gender is not sex. We'll talk about that in a second. So gender identity is the gender or the social sex, essentially, that someone identifies with. Although gender identity is often the same as a person's sex assigned at birth, it is not always, and there are many people who do not feel like their gender matches their sex assigned at birth. The next one is romantic orientation. Romantic orientation is a person's preference for certain people in a romantic relationship. Romantic relationships are often separate from sexual relationships. A person's sexual orientation is their preference for who they like to have sex with. This does not always have to cross over into dating, which is more the romantic side of things. The next one is romantic attraction. Romantic attraction is your level of interest in a particular person for a romantic or dating relationship. Sexual attraction is a person's level of interest in a sexual relationship with someone. A person's sexual orientation, sexual attraction, interests, sex preferences, as far as the actual activity go, can all be a part of their sexual preference. How they like to have sex, who they like to have sex with, and what they like their sexual life to look like. People who are queer are members of the GRSM LGBT community. However, because queer has historically been used as a derogatory term, it may not be appropriate for someone who is not a part of the queer community to use it to describe someone else. Queer is most often a self-referential term, or a term that is used within the community to identify other members of that community. If someone is fluid, they are able to transition or may over time transition between different sexual orientations, different gender identities, and various other aspects of their presentation and preferences. Someone who is questioning is exploring their sexual, romantic, and gender preferences. Because a lot of people don't believe that there are genders outside of male or female, or may not believe that people can be a gender other than the one assigned to them at birth, there is a gender binary. This is the belief that there is only male or female. There's nothing in between. Another term that is related to discrimination against people that are GRSM or LGBT is heteronormative. Being heteronormative is believing that everyone is straight, everyone is heterosexual. A related term is cisnormative. Cisnormative is the belief that everyone is the gender that matches with their sex assigned at birth. The next section we're going to talk about is specific to a person's biological sex or their sex assigned at birth. The first one is female. Someone is biologically female if they are born with 2 X chromosomes. This results in them having physical characteristics of being female, including a uterus and ovaries and a vagina, although this may not always be true for every female. The next biological sex is male. People who are male are born with XY sex chromosomes. People who are biologically male are born typically with a penis and testes. There's one other biological sex that not everyone may be aware of. People who are intersex do not have either XX or XY sex chromosomes. Intersex individuals are born with chromosomal abnormalities that result in them having a mixed match of these chromosomes, often having more than the number that they are supposed to have. A common example of an intersex individual is someone who is XXY. They have both 2 X's and an X and a Y. This can result in a number of different situations that are individual to each of these intersex situations. The next category we're going to discuss is gender. First, I want to point out that people can identify as many different genders. Some people will identify with a more female gender, some people will identify with a more male gender, some people may identify somewhere in between. Because gender is a social thing, the only way you know what gender someone is based on the particular society and the particular preferences of that person. Ultimately, if you don't know what gender someone is, and by extension, what pronouns to use for them, just ask. Most people are totally fine with you asking them if you're unsure. And it may sometimes be polite just to ask just so that you know. Not everyone who presents as more feminine or more masculine identifies with she or he pronouns as would be expected for their presentation. The first term in our gender section is cisgender. People who are cisgender identify with the gender that is associated with their sex at birth. For example, if someone is born XX, biologically female, they identify as a woman. The next term is bigender. Someone who is bigender identifies as being both male and female, or depending on what culture they come from, may identify as any 2 genders at a time. Bigender is not used as commonly anymore because it still fits into the gender binary of saying that there are only 2 genders available. Some people may also use the term bigender to identify themselves as someone who is 2 or more genders. So don't assume that just because they say that they are bigender, that they are saying they are purely either male or female or both. A more common term today is the term trans or transgender. People who identify as trans do not associate with a gender that matches their sex assigned at birth. So if someone is born XX, they may identify as anything other than female. Transgender is an incredibly wide spectrum, and each person who is trans may have different preferences and different ways that they want to express their trans identity. Although there are plenty of trans individuals who do have the desire to get sexual affirmation surgery or gender affirmation surgery, not every trans person does. If you're curious about the particular preferences of someone that you're talking to who identifies as trans, again, just ask them. There's one other gender identity that may occur. Someone who is agender may feel like they have no particular gender at all. They don't really feel like they fit in as being any particular socially identified gender category. If you don't know what this means with this person, again, ask them. The next few terms are going to refer to gender presentation, how people express the social side of their gender. If someone is feminine presenting, they present with traits that are typically feminine. They may like to put on makeup, wear dresses, wear tight, sexy pants. It doesn't necessarily mean that that person is identifying as female. Related to this is masculine presenting. Someone who prefers to present as more masculine may prefer to present as more tough, more muscular, more in charge, more typically male. However, this does not necessarily mean that they identify as male either. A common, socially acceptable for even the most prejudicial people version of this is someone presenting as a tomboy. Tomboys may identify as female, but may present in a more masculine, down with the boys kind of way. Another option for presentation is to present with androgyny. Androgyny means that the person does not present as either male or female. For example, some people who are transitioning may choose to have a more feminine body but maintain facial hair. There are many, many different versions of androgyny, and that is just one example, and people who are androgynous are not always trans either. Presentation really has nothing to do with the gender you identify with. Another term is gender nonconforming. Someone who is gender nonconforming does not fit with the typical gender expectations. They may intentionally do things that are outside of the gender they identify with, or between the genders they identify with, not just with their presentation or their appearance, but in every aspect of their life. Someone who is gender fluid is able to transition between different genders. They may be more feminine one day and more masculine the next. If someone identifies as genderqueer, they are essentially identifying as anything other than cisgender. This may be trans, bigender, or just somewhere other than I am the gender that matches with the sex I was assigned at birth. Someone who is gender normative presents with appearance that matches people's gender expectations for that person. For example, if someone identifies as female, they may act more feminine to match with society's expectation for girly women. The next few terms are specific to transgender individuals. People who are not familiar with the trans community often get confused or may intentionally misgender people based on a lack of understanding or bigotry. If it is a lack of understanding or ignorance, here are some terms that can be really helpful so you understand how people identify and what they mean by certain things. The first term is F2M. F2M is shorthand for female to male. Someone who is female to male was assigned female at birth and now identifies as a male, as a man. The opposite of this is M to F. Someone who is born or assigned male at birth and has transitioned or is transitioning to be a female. Another term that commonly confuses people is trans man. Someone who is a trans man currently identifies as male, but was assigned female at birth. The opposite of this, of course, is trans woman. A trans woman is someone who currently identifies as a woman, but was previously identified as a man. Sexual reassignment surgery or gender affirmation surgery is a combination of different surgeries of different intensities that allow a trans person to change their physical appearance and anatomy to better match their identity. Gender reassignment surgery or gender affirmation surgery can include surgery of the genitals, but does not always necessarily mean that. Other examples can be having breasts removed or created, having facial surgery to better match the gender you identify with, and other associated surgeries. There's a wide spectrum, and not every trans person intends to surgically change their appearance. A trans person who is in the process of transitioning is changing from the sex they were assigned to their identified gender. There is a wide variety of this, and it includes both social, emotional, and physical changes. Oftentimes, if someone does want to get gender affirmation surgery, they have to live as that gender for a while before they can do the surgery. This is a long process to transition depending on how far the person wants to go and what they're intending to do. Transitioning is often one of the times when trans people are most often targeted for oppression and for violence. The next section is related to sexual preference. Someone who is heterosexual prefers a sexual relationship with someone other than the gender that they are. Most of the time, because the majority of people in a heteronormative world identify as either male or female, someone who is heterosexual will have a sexual preference for someone who is the opposite gender of themselves. People who are homosexual have a sexual preference for someone who is the same gender as themselves. People who are bisexual have a preference for both male and female. This term is going a little bit out of favor, although it is sometimes used by people who specifically mean that they only believe there's two genders and they prefer both male and female. It is sometimes used by people to describe a lack of a preference for a person's gender or a partner's gender. It's complicated. Again, if someone says they're bisexual, you can ask them for specifics, or if you're not intending to date them, don't bother. It's not any of your business. A more inclusive term is pansexual. Someone who is pansexual really doesn't care what gender you identify as. That doesn't necessarily mean that they will just sleep with anyone, which is a common misconception. People who are pansexual may still have a preference for a particular gender, but depending on who the person is and what the particular attributes are, they may not care in certain situations what the gender of the person is. Many people use the term pansexual to indicate that they prefer both cisgender and transgender individuals. A person who identifies as giliosexual has a specific preference for people who are transgender. Finally, someone who is asexual kind of doesn't really want to do sex anyway. An asexual person typically has no or very low sex drive. It may depend on the person. They just don't really find people sexually attractive at all. Someone who is androsexual prefers people who present in a masculine way. On the other side of this, people who are gynosexual prefer people who present in a feminine way. Both androsexual and gynosexual people prefer people based on their appearance, not necessarily on what parts that they have. A term that is sometimes used is bicurious. Someone who's bicurious is interested in exploring relationships with people of genders other than the one they typically date or have sex with, but is not committed to doing this at that time and doesn't necessarily identify as being bi or pansexual. The next couple terms are related to people's sexual versus romantic relationships. Someone who is demi-romantic has to have a sexual attraction to someone before they would consider being in a romantic relationship with that person. Oftentimes, this may be that they need to find the person sexually attractive before they'd even think about dating them, or they may need to actually sleep with the person before they would consider dating them. The opposite of this is demisexual. Someone who is demisexual needs to be romantically attracted to someone before they find them sexually attractive. Oftentimes, people who are demisexual need to get to know this person and find them intriguing and interesting and likable before they find them sexually attractive or would be interested in a sexual relationship. People who are aromantic, they don't want romance at all. There are people who are aromantic and asexual. There are also people who are aromantic and hypersexual. People who are aromantic and hypersexual may not ever want to settle down with someone, but may very much enjoy having sex. On the flip side, an aromantic asexual person is perfectly fine having non-sexual, non-romantic friends, but doesn't want any committed romantic or sexual relationships. Some common slang terms related to sexual identity is gay. Someone being gay refers to someone being a homosexual. As a reminder, homosexual means you like people of the same gender as yourself. Sometimes The term gay is used specifically for men who prefer to have sex with other men, but it doesn't always mean this. A related term is lesbian. The term lesbian also refers to a person who is a homosexual who prefers a relationship with someone of the same gender as themselves, but almost exclusively refers to women who like to have sex with other women. The terms gay and lesbian are sometimes used to differentiate between finding lesbian relationships more acceptable, but finding male-on-male relationships more disgusting. Gay is oftentimes used by intolerant assholes to put down other people by saying, "Oh, that's gay. Oh, are you gay? That's not cool, guys. Let's stop doing that. That's very discriminatory and not cool." Another slang term that is oftentimes used is straight. Straight refers to someone who is heterosexual, who prefers someone who is a gender other than their own. Most often when someone is saying that they are straight, they are specifically saying that they prefer someone who is the quote-unquote opposite gender of themselves. For example, someone who identifies as a man who identifies as straight will prefer people who identify as women. Some people who use the term straight may use it specifically to discount and to vilify trans individuals. Although this is not always the case, and the term straight is very ubiquitous, that does happen sometimes, and it's good to be aware of. There are two last terms. These two terms are often used in medical communities. The HIV treatment community uses them very often. They're also sometimes used for communities that have traditional values that make being homosexual or pansexual or bisexual unacceptable in their community. The first one is MSM. People who identify as MSM, which stands for men who have sex with men, being an MSM individual does not necessarily imply that you're homosexual. It does not imply that you're bisexual or that you're pansexual. Identifying as MSM may be that you are identifying as heterosexual, but you do occasionally have sex with other men. A related term is WSW. WSW stands for women who have sex with women. Again, it doesn't necessarily imply a particular sexual orientation, more so a lifestyle and the option to have sex with certain people. The last couple terms we're going to talk about are related to people's relationship status. The first one is monogamy. If someone is in a monogamous relationship, they have sex with only one partner at a time. This may sometimes be lifelong monogamy, although, let's be real, in humans that's relatively rare, or it may be serial monogamy. People who are serially monogamous have sex with only one individual or may date only one individual at a time. That said, not everyone who's monogamous is romantically monogamous either. There is sexual monogamy and romantic monogamy, and some people may do both or one or the other, but not both. Everyone's relationship situation is very different. The alternative to monogamy is polyamory. Polyamory, or being poly, is being in a relationship with more than one person at a time. Many people who are poly may have one or more primary partners, or may just have a couple primary partners that all kind of work together to have one happy poly family. So, with all of this said, I'm going to finish this video off by talking a little bit about my own preferences and my own identification. From outward appearances, people who don't know me, people who I would work with, I appear to be a very cis, het, female, monogamous person. Those are not all true. Although I do identify as cisgender, I do identify with she, her pronouns, I do identify as a woman. I'm also not going to be offended or bothered if someone chooses to use gender neutral or even masculine terms for me. If someone wants to call me he, that's fine. You do you. They, them is probably preferred if you don't want to use she, her, but if you call me he, I don't care. When I was very, very young, I had some probably a little bit trans thoughts. I had some issues with my body and with being female. I don't want to say grown out of them, because most trans people don't grow out of those feelings. I guess I've come to be more comfortable in being a woman and being feminine. I will also say that the chances of someone using a different gender from female for me is relatively low because I happen to have big titties. It's just a thing. It's true, and most people are going to see my appearance and they're going to use she, her because I am femme presenting if in physical body alone. I do sometimes wear more feminine presenting clothes. I also don't always act that feminine. I work on my car. I've been building a camper van. I will get down and dirty. I like to know things that are not traditionally feminine, and I like to do activities that are not traditionally feminine. I also cuss like a sailor most of the time, and I'm not that meek and demure. Which just goes to show that we are lucky enough to be living in a time where what it means to be purely female or purely male is changing. It's okay for there to be a gray area in between those two extremes. So, yes, I identify as cisgender. I do use she, her pronouns, but I'm definitely not strict on that. If you want to use gender neutral, that's totally cool. Let me start with the one that's actually probably more important than my sexual preference. I am very, very strongly demisexual. In order for me to find someone sexually attractive, I need to be very good friends with them. Very good friends with them. I don't find strangers attractive, ever. Have I? I can appreciate the appearance of certain people, but I would not find them someone who I'd want to sleep with just based on appearance alone. Let me say that. Good attitude, being an interesting person, being kind, being compassionate, those are the things that are going to make me attracted to you long before what you look like. With that said, as far as physical appearance goes, and anatomy goes, I am definitely pansexual. If I like you as a person, I don't care what your plumbing is, and I don't care what you look like. I will say to an extent. Obviously, there's a spectrum to that. I will say, as far as just pure looks go, I find feminine people more pleasing to look at. I don't typically find muscly, intimidating, super masculine guys to be hot. They have to have a really, really good personality for me to find that attractive. I don't like body hair at all, really. I mean, if I really, really like you, it doesn't really matter. But as far as just physical appearances go, body hair is not really my thing. And yeah, like, more feminine people, trans people can be very, very attractive. I mean, I've had some trans friends who are incredible as far as celebrities go. Oh my god, Laverne Cox. Like, I like her as a person too, which I guess is part of why that's a thing. Yeah, so physical appearance, not as much of a thing. If I had to choose a physical appearance that I prefer a little bit more, it's going to be more female presenting people with, a more feminine look. But that's, like, not by a whole lot. What matters more for me in romantic or sexual relationships is who the person is. What do you look like? How do you act? What kind of character do you have? My friends are amongst pretty much the only oogle pool I have. My drool pool, let's call it that. My drool pool is almost exclusively made up of my friends. With that all being said, another interesting part of my life is that I am a long-term monogamous. I think that poly relationships are something that people should think about and potentially experiment with to find what works best for you. You should experiment with what kind of relationships to find what works best for you and your preferences and your relationship style. Me and my husband, we have only ever slept with each other. We've been together since I was 16. We got married 5 years after we first got together, and we've been married for 7 or 8 years now. It's been a long time. Through that time, we have worked very hard to make our relationship work out. It's not been an easy path. I very much value the fact that me and my husband are long-term monogamous, have only ever had each other for partners. I also acknowledge, though, that we probably could benefit from having more diverse experience. Having never slept with anyone else, there are certain things that can sometimes creep into your mind that you wonder, that you're like, am I really good in bed? Is there ways that I could be pleasured better? It can make it a little harder to communicate your needs if you don't know what some of the other options are. So with that said, I am very happy with my relationship. And for now, at least, I'm happy to keep it monogamous. If things change in the future, me and my husband have both talked about the potential for trying a poly relationship if we ever decide that's something we want to do. However, at this time, we're not ready to commit to that. The other thing that is part of my identity is that I am also hyposexual. I didn't talk about this as much. This more goes into that sexual attraction part that I talked about at the very, very beginning. My level of interest in sexual activity is low. Very low. When I was a kid, and by kid I mean like a teenager, like a snot-nosed brat. No, I love teenagers. They're probably my favorites. Little kids are not my thing, so I don't have children. But when I was a teenager, I would go with my friends to the mall, and we would be hanging out, and they would see someone that they found attractive, and they'd be like, oh man, that person's so hot, blah, 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 blah. And I didn't get it, right? Between being strongly demisexual and having a low sex drive, I was like, cool. Glad you find that person attractive. I don't see it. When someone with hyposexual drive is in a relationship with someone who most likely does not have hyposexual drive, I'm lucky that my husband is probably not hypersexual. Again, I've only been with one guy, so I don't completely know that, but I'm pretty sure he's average for a dude. Even though I'm in this relationship with a person with what I believe is a normal sex drive, and I do not have as high of a sex drive, we have very good communication, and we have very good consent. This allows both of us to get our needs met fairly well. Both of us have a little bit of sacrificing. It's definitely not a perfect match. It'd be nice if it was, but most of us probably aren't there. So we meet in the middle, and we do things to try to make things better. Now, in a future video, I will talk about one thing that I did to kind of help with that. I will say this mystery thing has worked quite well. Hopefully, I have so many other videos I want to work on, but hopefully I'll get that video out relatively soon. With that said, during Pride Month, I think it's a really great time for people to think about what your preferences, what your desires, what your interests are in a lifestyle, in a companion, in an identity. It's a good time to identify as questioning, right? Even if it's just for 1 month. You know, it can be really helpful to say, hey, is this relationship style of monogamous or poly what I really want long term? Have things changed? If you're in a long-term relationship, this could be a good time to have a conversation with your partner and really talk about these issues and be like, hey, is this really what we want to maintain long-term, right? And both of you should get an equal say in it. If you're just 2 people, or even if you're poly and you have multiple people, everyone should have a little bit of a say, right? This is a really good time to evaluate, hey, Am I sleeping with people I'm sleeping with because I was told that's who I'm supposed to sleep with, or is it because I am interested in sleeping with these people? Do I actually find them attractive? Am I actually getting my needs met in these relationships? If I have a longer term partner or partners, are their needs getting met? Is there any changes we need to make to help make that a little bit better? It's a good time to identify if you're just going along with your gender identity because that's what you've been told you should do, or if that's actually what you like. One of the benefits of the friend circle I have is that it's given me an opportunity to evaluate my beliefs, my thoughts, my desires. It's given me an opportunity to say, hey, am I trans, right? Or am I cisgender? Am I straight or am I not? Do I still want to be in a monogamous relationship or do I not? So Pride Month is both a time to celebrate a population that has been stigmatized and treated like shit for pretty much all of human history. There have been certain civilizations that have respected people of different genders and different sexual preferences, but definitely in the United States, that is not historically been the norm. So let's celebrate, let's enjoy our GRSM creators and friends and possibly family members. Let's evaluate our own beliefs and values and lifestyles. Let's fight for keeping GRSM people moving in the direction of more and more rights. With the way that the current administration is, there's a lot of hostility, and there's a lot of hostility to people of pretty much anything that's not straight, white, and rich. So as we move forward, it is important for us to continue to stand up for the rights of our GRSM and other minority communities. I encourage everyone, if you liked this, to please snuggle up to that subscribe button. You know, if you ring the bell, a gay fairy gets its wings. Is that too insensitive? I don't know. I think it's a cute idea, little gay fairy. And if you ring the bell, it gets its wings, so it's awesome. So do those things. If you like it, hit the like button. Have an awesome Pride Month, and stay safe out there, everyone.